History is sometimes the result not of brute force, but of mathematical precision and an unshakable will. In the autumn of 52 BC, in the foggy valleys of what we today call France, more than just a battle took place. The fate of a civilization was sealed. On one side was the ambitious and brilliant Roman general Julius Caesar. On the other, the proud leader Vercingetorix, who had managed to unite the fragmented Gallic tribes under a single banner for the first time. Alesia was not just a hill, it was the table for the greatest strategic gamble history had ever seen. Now, listen to the howl of the wind and the sound of pickaxes striking the earth. For here, on the steep slopes of Alesia, the Roman army gathered not to conquer a city, but to build the impossible. This is the story of those epic days when the besieger became the besieged, the hunter became the prey, and the color of a cloak heralded the birth of an empire. It all began with a risky decision by Vercingetorix. The Gallic leader wanted to cut off Caesar's supply lines and starve him into submission. As part of this strategy, he moved his army and his people to a natural fortress called Alesia, a massive plateau surrounded by steep slopes. 80,000 warriors and thousands of civilians waited on this high hill for the Romans to arrive. Vercingetorix believed this place was safe. The two rivers surrounding the hill, the Oss and the Osserene, served as natural moats. But Caesar did not see this place as a fortress. He saw it as a coffin. When he arrived before Alesia, he knew that attacking the hill would be suicidal. He gave his legions a single order: start digging. The Roman army was as much an engineering battalion as it was a war machine. Caesar began the circumvallation line, a massive fortification designed to completely cut the city off from the outside world. An 18-kilometer-long, 4-meter-high wall of wood and earth. The military logic here was simple, but its execution was terrifying. If the 80,000 warriors inside could not get out to find food, the Gallic resistance would collapse under its own weight. Roman soldiers worked day and night without wiping the mud from their armor. Forests were cleared, trenches were dug, and the iron grip of Rome tightened around Alesia with every passing hour. However, Vercingetorix had not made a mistake. He was also playing a gamble. Just before the siege was completed, a group of Gallic cavalry managed to slip through the lines in the dead of night and carry word to all the Gallic tribes. The message was clear: everyone gather, strike Rome from the back. When the news reached Caesar, the gravity of the situation became apparent. A massive relief army of 250,000 men was on the way. The Roman army, with its 50,000 legionaries, would be caught between 80,000 enemies inside and 250,000 approaching from the outside. An ordinary general would have retreated, but Caesar made the most absurd and brilliant move in history. He ordered the construction of a second wall, 200 meters behind the existing one, facing the outside world. The 21-kilometer-long contravallation line. Now imagine the scene. The Roman army was sandwiched between two massive walls of its own construction. On one side, the city they were besieging. On the other, a massive external army besieging them. The Roman army was now inside the largest and most dangerous sandwich in the world. If even one of those lines broke, Rome would be wiped from the pages of history that day. Caesar whispered to his soldiers, "We are both the prisoners and the masters of these walls." Caesar did not just settle for building walls. He turned those lines into an insurmountable labyrinth of death. Engineering was the only way to balance the disparity in numbers. In front of the wall facing outward, he had 5 rows of massive trenches dug. The frontmost trenches were filled with water from the river. Behind them, he set traps he called lilies. These were deep pits with sharpened and sometimes poisoned stakes at the bottom, covered with thin branches. He didn't stop there. Beneath the soil, he buried small stakes with iron-hooked tips called stimuli. When a Gallic warrior charged the wall in the dark, they would trip over these hooks or fall into the lilies before they could even draw their sword. This was the ancient version of modern landmine fields. Caesar had built a defense not against his enemies' courage, but against their walking speed. Geometry had become a shield against the barbarians' rage. Inside, on the hill of Alesia, the situation turned into a tragedy. To save the limited food for his soldiers, Vercingetorix expelled the women, children, and elderly from the city. He hoped they would be allowed to pass through the Roman lines, but Caesar showed no mercy. He trapped the civilians between the two walls. Neither Rome gave them food, nor the Gauls took them back. For days, both armies listened to the screams of these people dying of hunger. This was the darkest face of psychological warfare. Caesar was breaking his enemies' morale through the helplessness of their own people. And finally, a cloud of dust rose on the horizon. 250,000 Gallic warriors spread across the valley with screams that tore through the sky. Thousands of colorful banners, spear tips, and war chariots. The moment of decision for the Roman army had arrived. When the horns blew, the legionaries raised their shields and took their positions in the trenches facing both inward and outward. When the battle began, Caesar's traps worked with terrifying efficiency. Charging Gauls tumbled into the trenches and were impaled on the lilies. However, the sheer superiority in numbers was so great that they advanced by stepping on the dead. Vercingetorix also launched a simultaneous attack from the inside. Roman soldiers stood back to back, forming the testudo, tortoise formation, against the rain of spears coming from both directions. The positions were reeling. Gauls were battering the Roman walls with sledgehammers and trying to tear down the wooden towers with hooks. Caesar had to protect the North Hill, the weakest point of the line, which could not be fully fortified due to the terrain. The Gallic leaders had noticed this weak spot. 60,000 elite warriors slipped to this hill under the cover of night and began to descend upon the Roman camp like an avalanche at dawn. The North Hill was about to fall. The legions under the command of Labienus were melting away against an enemy 10 times their number. Fortifications were shattered, and hand-to-hand combat had begun. Rome's defeat was now a matter of moments. At that instant, one of the most iconic scenes in history occurred. Julius Caesar had watched the battle from a high tower until then. Seeing that the situation was desperate, he donned his helmet and threw his blood-red cloak over his shoulders. The cloak was not chosen at random. This cloak was a banner. He wanted his soldiers to see him and his enemies to understand that he had arrived. Caesar, along with the last 400 German cavalrymen by his side, rode like lightning toward the bloodiest point of the battle. Seeing the red cloak waving on the battlefield, the Roman soldiers found a miraculous boost in morale. Tired arms raised their shields once more, and broken spears were replaced by gladius swords. As Caesar himself engaged in the fight, a secret cavalry unit he had pre-planned slipped around the back of the outer wall and attacked the rear of the Gallic relief army. This was the final move in a game of chess. Checkmate. Just when the Gauls thought they had won, they saw Roman horsemen behind them. The cry of, "We are surrounded!" spread like a virus through the 250,000-man army. The undisciplined mass succumbed to fear. An army's weakest moment is when it thinks it is being attacked from behind. The Gallic army collapsed like a house of cards and began to flee. The pursuit was relentless. Rivers were stained crimson with Gallic blood. The next morning, a silent smoke rose over Alesia. The massive force of 250,000 on the outside had been destroyed. For Vercingetorix inside, there was no longer any hope. The gates of Alesia slowly opened. Gaul's last hero donned his most brilliant armor, mounted his horse, and rode toward Caesar's established dais. Vercingetorix rode silently in a circle around Caesar. This was an old Gallic tradition. Then he dismounted, knelt, and laid his armor and sword in the dust at Caesar's feet. He did not speak, but this silence was the farewell of a free Gaul. Caesar did not speak either. He only signaled to his guards with a nod. Vercingetorix was taken to Rome as a shackled trophy. For 6 years, he waited in the dark dungeon to be paraded in Caesar's triumph. And when that day came, he was strangled to death before all of Rome. But ironically, just 2 years after that triumph, Caesar would march on Rome with his own army to declare his dictatorship, only to be assassinated in the Senate shortly after.